Today I'm going to be reviewing all the books I read in the month of January. I went a little bananas in my reading in January. I think it's because my December reading was so non-existent. I only read 4 books in December. So in January, I was energized. I was ready to read. I was flying through books. I was DNFing things I was uninterested in. And I had a pretty good reading month. As always, we're going to go in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. And we're going to start with the books I DNF'd. There were a lot of them this month. The first 2 books I DNF'd in the month of January are both arcs that I had through NetGalley, and I know there's different opinions about do you DNF arcs or do you not, like feeling an obligation to read them once you have been granted access to them from the publisher or if the publisher sends you a book. My opinion on that has changed throughout the years. Currently, I feel like I can't force myself through a book that I don't want to read. So you request a book on NetGalley thinking that you're going to enjoy it, you know, you're interested in the idea of it, and you start reading it and then it's just not for you. And I think giving that review is just as valid as giving a review of the experience you would have had if you would have read the full book. But I can see how others would disagree. That's just my opinion right now. Anyways, I DNF'd The Night of the Storm, which I was really upset about because I thought this sounded like my perfect kind of book. It's pitched as an isolated locked room mystery thriller where all of these people are stuck together in this house during Hurricane Harvey. Murder ensues. Who did it? Dun dun dun. Are we all gonna die? Unfortunately, I was not having a good time with it. The main character in this novel is a mother who is currently worried about losing custody of her son, and that is consuming all of her thoughts, which I think is totally realistic and is what would happen if you're going through that situation in real life. But reading a thriller where I just want it to be like moody and I want to start getting into the mystery of the murders and who's doing it and what's going on, it was just a lot to be stuck in her thoughts of just thinking of that over and over and over again. So it was making it difficult for me to get into the book. And I was holding out hope that once things started to go more awry, that we would get into the whole thriller of it all and I would get more consumed and I would start to be more invested in these characters. But once the very first incident happens, seeing the characters' reaction to it just really pulled me out of the story. I just felt like they weren't really reacting in a way that made sense. And I just didn't see myself enjoying the story if I was to stick with it. So this one ended up being a DNF for me. I also DNF'd Island Witch. This one I did not get as far into. I really just barely started it. And all in all, it was just reading like something that I was not going to enjoy. I haven't read from this author before, so I didn't really know what to expect with their writing style, but I've heard really good things. And then going into this one, it just felt like a YA book and it was a little more magic fantasy than I typically read. And I just wasn't getting into the story, so I decided to sit it down, but I really didn't give it like too much of a chance. It just wasn't something that immediately felt like something I would enjoy, so I set it down. But you know, if it was something you're interested in, don't take my review for anything because this one is really meaningless. I just wasn't in the mood for it. The next book I have to talk about that I DNF'd, you're gonna be like, Ashley, are you okay? What are you doing reading that book? Listen, I know, that's why I DNF'd it, because I found out pretty quickly that it wasn't for me, and that is Fourth Wing. I told you I was just reading like crazy this month. I really got back into audiobooks, so I would just go on my Everand app, formerly known as Scribd, and I would just find something that looked interesting, put it on, listen to a chapter or two, and if I didn't hate the narrator's voice and I thought it was mildly compelling, I would just keep listening. So I actually DNF'd more books than I even have mentioned in this video, but I don't really count those as DNFs as much because I would just like barely listen to the first couple of pages and then I put it down, which doesn't really merit talking about. But Fourth Wing, I decided why not? Why not? Everybody loves it. Well, not everybody, but many people love it. It was very popular last year. The sequels come out, and the way people talked about it, I felt like there was a chance that I would enjoy it. I truly did think I might be able to be pulled into this because I hear people talking about it giving them that same feeling that we got when we were younger and the Hunger Games came out and Divergent came out and you got so subsumed in this series and it's like teenage angst and love triangles and like, oh my gosh, are we gonna die? And you just get really pulled into it. And I recently rewatched all the Hunger Games movies because the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes one came out. So I've just been really in a mood of like, I would love to get reabsorbed in some series. I even rewatched the entire 50 Shades of Grey series. I don't know what's going on with me right now. I'm just in a series mood. So I put Fourth Wing on. I gave it a chance. I gave it a good chance. Let me see how much I listened. I listened to 20% of this book, and it's a really long audiobook. So 20% was a good, decent chunk. And I don't get the hype. I don't get it. That's okay. It's okay if you do. I know a lot of people love this. I wasn't feeling any of the things that I thought I might feel. I did not like the main character right off the bat. The writing just didn't feel good to me, and it read really YA, but it's supposed to be an adult book, so that was odd to me. Especially, I did go and read spoilers for what happens in the whole book. Once I decided, like, absolutely I'm not going to be reading this, I did look into spoilers just because I have FOMO. I want to know what everybody loves. And I feel like I would not have enjoyed this even if I kept reading to get to more of the action, because I read enough to like establish who characters are and to know a little bit about the world building, a little bit of the background, a little bit of what's going on. So reading the spoilers, I could connect that to the experience I already had. And I'm like, I just don't think that would have done anything for me. But clearly it is a very popular book for a reason and many people love this. And honestly, I'm glad I give it a little bit of a try because the FOMO was real. But I did save myself a lot of time because now I won't be reading any more of that book, reading the sequel. I just got in early and I decided it wasn't for me, and I'll let everyone else enjoy it, and it just will not be for me. The other books I DNF'd this month are ones that are a little more up my alley. It makes sense for me to read them, but I just didn't want to keep going with them. The first one is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I got about 100 pages into this one, so I read a decent chunk of it, and I did listen to the audiobook with the physical copy as well. And I will say one thing about this book is it just is stylized really nicely. Like each page has these little brackets on the top and the bottom, just kind of containing the story. And in general, the cover is really great. Like it looks nice. It's aesthetically pleasing. And this one is kind of a mix of genres. It's a gothic, it's a little bit fantasy, it's a little bit horror, it's a little bit mystery. It's kind of like a genre blend of a lot of these things. And I've read from Alex E. Harrow in the past. I've previously DNF'd another book from her, the Witches one, and then I have read a short novella that she wrote called A Splintered something. It was like a fairy tale retelling. I did like that one, but I just don't really think Alex E. Harrow's books are for me. I could have kept going in this book. I could have kept reading it, but I just wasn't intrigued. And I just reached a point where I felt like it was not going to be more than a 3-star, and it was probably going to be a 2-star. And instead of reading the whole book just to have a 2-star experience, I'm really just giving myself permission to DNF. So sat this one down 100 pages in, just wasn't overly interested in the story. And it just had this like angsty moodiness to it that I just found to be a little bit annoying. This is another book that kind of read YA to me. Like it kind of felt like a young adult book in an adult book's clothing. Like when you're a child and you wear like your parents' clothing because you're like trying to pass off as an adult, but really you're like really angsty and moody and have all these life lessons still to learn. That's sort of how it came off to me. This book was also reminding me of a couple other things that I have already read, including The Hazelwood, which was a young adult book, and A History of Wild Places, which was an adult book. And I just enjoyed both of those books more than I was enjoying this, and it just reminded me so much of those other books that it just wasn't going to be for me. And then finally, I also DNF'd No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. I got halfway through this book. I read a good chunk of it, and I just could not be bothered to continue. It also had a sort of moodiness to it. There was something about these moody books this month where I was just like, no, I don't want to be reading these moody characters. I'm just not interested in it. And I was going into this one with a little bit of hesitation or caution anyways, because the last book I read from Kate Alice Marshall, which was the first book I read from Kate Alice Marshall, What Lies in the Woods, I also did not enjoy. I gave that book 2 stars. And as I was reading this one, it kind of just kept reminding me of that book. This is a story about this woman who has these sisters that she's estranged from because when she was a teenager, her parents were murdered and everyone in the town thinks that she did it. And then her and her sister's relationships dispersed since then. They've moved on, they're living separate lives. But then our main character, now in her present day, falls on hard times, doesn't have a place to live, and is moving back into this house where her parents were murdered with her husband. And also she's pregnant, and now she's in this town again, and he's kind of seeing how everyone in the town thinks she murdered her parents, and also probably starting to wonder that for himself. But she doesn't really remember fully what happened that night, and she can't fully piece together the story of her parents' murder, but being back in the scenario is starting to trigger her memories, and she's starting to remember, or at least gets the urge to want to remember and investigate what actually did happen to her parents. That plot device makes me so angry in thrillers. I find it so annoying where the main character lived this experience and at one point did know what happened and has now forgotten about it. And that was the same thing with What Lies in the Woods. And when I read that book and I didn't enjoy it, I talked a lot about how I fully understand that is realistic and that trauma can make you repress your memories. But in a thriller book, I just find that to be such an annoying plot device where it's like the main character has all this information somewhere and they just have to like unlock it. And then all of a sudden everything will become clear. And in addition to that, it's like she's withholding certain things from the reader. It's like there even is some things she does know, but she's not telling you. And that's so annoying to me. I just want to follow a main character who knows as much information as I know as the reader and is actively piecing the mystery together by gathering clues and by talking to other people and really searching to figure out what has gone on. When it's written like this, I just find it really annoying. Plus, there are a lot of POVs in this story because you get all the sisters' POVs in the present day and in the past day. So it's kind of a lot of POVs to keep up with. And it just felt like the story was really slowly slogging along. I had a pretty good idea of what happened by the time I got to the midway point, and I was not invested enough to read the remaining half to figure it out. But I did look up spoilers for this one as well. And I am very glad I DNF'd because 1, I pretty much knew what happened, and 2, the other things that do end up happening and being revealed in the story were not things that interested me, and I feel like I would have just been annoyed if I kept going with the story to reveal those things. So this was a good decision for me to DNF. Didn't work for me. I don't think I'm gonna pick up anything else from Kate Alice Marshall because I've had 2 very similar experiences with her books and I just don't think they're for me, and that's okay. Now moving on to the books that I did complete. We only have 1 book to talk about that I did not enjoy, and then the rest is all positive, happy news because I truly was just DNFing books I wasn't enjoying. I wasn't forcing myself all the way through them, but there was 1 book that I did have to read this month for a book club, and unfortunately, I really disliked it. And that is Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. I was reading this book with my friends Lexi and Jessie for Jessie's book club this month, and by the time you're seeing this video, we will have already had our book club discussion, so I will have that linked down below if you want to go back and see that full discussion and also hear other people's thoughts on the book. I have not lived the experience of doing the book club discussion yet, so I don't know what they thought about it, and I'm actually really curious to see if I'm more of an outlier opinion or if everyone kind of feels the same way about this, because when I started reading this book, I did check the average rating on Goodreads and it was like a 3.5, which is fairly low. So it does seem like this book is getting some mixed reactions, and I can totally see why, because I just don't think this book worked. I don't think it was effective. I don't think it was structured well. I honestly just don't think it was a good idea, but alas, it was a book club selection, so I did have to complete it. In this moment, I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to give it a 1 star or a 2 star. I'm thinking maybe 2 stars because I'm trying to be a little bit generous to some of the concept of the book that I think like sort of had some legs to stand on, but I just thought the execution was so poor that it honestly might end up being a 1 star. I'm sure I'll figure out my final opinion in the book club discussion, so you can go see that to see where I fully land with it, but it's definitely not any higher than a 2 for me. It is a bummer because I thought the concept of this sounded really interesting. I have read from Christina Henry before. I did read Near the Bone, and I'm pretty sure I gave that book a 1 star as well. I did not enjoy that one. It was very popular. Many people liked it, and I did not like it. And for some of the reasons that I didn't like that book, it carried over to this book as well. So I do think I am going to not be picking up any more Christina Henry. I just don't think Christina Henry's an author for me. Totally fine. Just not something that meshes with my reading tastes. But I did have high hopes for this because I thought it sounded interesting, and I thought it might be a redemption for me, and I might see that, oh, I do like Christina Henry's books. Like maybe Near the Bone was just a fluke, but I just don't think that her storytelling matches with what I like to read in books. But anyway, the concept of this one is that you're following 3 different women. You're following Celia, Allie, and Maggie, and they each have 3 different storylines they're living out where they're in these confusing and dangerous situations that they're trying to get out of. Celia wakes up in a house that she doesn't recognize, with a husband she doesn't recognize, and a daughter she doesn't recognize. She has lost all memory of her life, and she finds herself in the middle of a murder mystery when something happens in her town. Then you have Allie, who is going on a weekend getaway with her friends, but it turns out that now she's going to this cabin in the middle of the woods and might be in the middle of a slasher story. And then Maggie just wants to be at home with her daughter. She's put in a dangerous situation and doesn't know who put her there or why. She'll have to fight with everything she has to survive. Hers in particular is really vague. I was going to tell you the general kind of setup of what her story is, but I guess the synopsis doesn't want you to know, so I won't spoil it any further than that. But the tagline for this is 3 women, 3 stories, only one way out. This captivating novel will keep readers guessing until the very end. I'm not going to spoil anything in this review about this book, but I do think it becomes fairly evident what's going on pretty quickly on, and I also think the structure of the book kind of hinders the experience of it because you don't read all 3 stories interspersed. You read all of Celia's story and then all of Allie's story and then all of Maggie's story. So the book is set up in different parts so that the first 100 or so pages is Celia's story, then you get Allie's story, Maggie's story, and then the remainder of the novel. Once you read Celia's story, I feel like you kind of have a full understanding of what's going on. It doesn't like fully reveal everything to you, but I mean, you know enough information. And then you have to read all of Allie's story, basically already knowing what's going on, but seeing another woman in a different situation. And then you have to read all of Maggie's story. And then you finally get to that end point where it's like, all right, now we're going to advance the story and something's going to happen from there. But I think this book would have been so much more interesting if it had interspersed the women's stories. So you read a little bit of Celia's, a little bit of Allie's, a little bit of Maggie's, and it kept like taking you through them each progressing in their own storylines, each figuring out what's going on all at the same time instead of reading all of Celia's story where she figures out what's going on and all of Allie's and then all of Maggie's. It just really lost me after Celia's story. I also found Allie's story to be really poorly written. And then Maggie's story I thought was slightly more interesting, but again, like I already knew what was happening, and so I just wanted to rush to get to that last part to see what was going to happen following where all these women's stories ended. So I just think structurally it didn't work very well. It's also pretty over the top and not in a way that I enjoyed. Like I love an over the top ridiculous thriller, but I don't know, something about the way this was done, it didn't read campy in an intentional way to me. It just read kind of cheesy. And I do think there's like themes and things to be discussed out of this, but it just felt very surface level, not super nuanced, and it just wasn't great in my opinion. So I am interested to go into that book club discussion and see what Lexi and Jesse and everyone who read along with the book club thought about this one as well, see some other opinions, and honestly just get a little bit of catharsis by getting to talk about all the things I didn't like about this with other people. So it should be a fun discussion, even though I didn't love the book, but at least now I do know Christina Henry's books are probably not for me. Next up is a little batch of 3-star books that I had. All of these books I thought were good. I probably won't have too much to say about any of them because I didn't feel super passionately towards them in terms of loving them or finding anything super wrong with them. I just thought all of these were solid reads, so if they sound interesting, I would recommend giving them a try. The first one is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This is one of those books that I just put up on audiobook during the month and then got really hooked in the story, especially the character's voice really pulled me into this one. I actually have read from Melissa Broder in the past. I have read Milk Fed, and I also listened to that one on audiobook. That was a couple years ago, and I did not like that book. I didn't get it. I didn't understand why people loved it. It just was not something that I enjoyed at all. I didn't hate it, but I was just like, what am I reading? I just don't understand it. So I was a little bit nervous about going into this one, but it sounded so intriguing to me when I heard the synopsis. I feel like I heard people talking about this on TikTok, and the way people describe it is that this woman ends up going into the desert and seeing this big cactus and kind of goes into it, and then she has like a weird experience. And they specifically describe the cactus as being very vaginal in nature. And that description made me go on my little Everand app and say, I would like to listen to that, please. And I was so hooked. She is such an interesting character, and Melissa Broder's writing is just so sharp. It's just something you don't want to look away from. Like you just want to keep reading, and you're like, I would listen to you describe anything, talk about anything, because it's just such an interesting personality that you're in with both, you know, it's like obviously the author writing, but then also the character she's creating. This character is going through it. Her dad is in the hospital and she thinks he's gonna die, and her husband has been sick for a long time and she thinks he's gonna die. And instead of being in the hospital with her father right now, she's like, I think I'm gonna go off into the desert and book a Best Western, my favorite hotel ever. And she tells you a lot about why Best Western is her favorite hotel. And I am going to be doing this research for this book I'm trying to write about a woman who's going through a hard time grieving, and she goes out into the desert and a Best Western and da-da-da-da. So it's like a little bit meta in that her character is writing about her character going through the same experience. So she's doing this like research in order to be able to write about that in her book. So it's a little bit autobiographical in itself, I think, because I think it sort of mirrors Melissa Broder's experience. I don't fully know, I didn't look into it a ton. But anyways, you're just listening to her talk about the hard things going on in her life, her love for Best Western. There's a couple employees there who she's interested in. She's taking some journeys through the desert and she starts having some weird experiences and then gets lost in the desert. And it's just the absolute perfect length for what it is. Sometimes books like this go on for too long that it kind of ruins it. This was the absolutely perfect length. It did not need to be any longer. It didn't need to be any shorter. It gave you that amount of weirdness and meditation on life and things in the perfect package without dragging it on for longer than it needed to be so that you could have a good experience with it. The reason it got a 3-star for me is because I did feel like the first half was a lot stronger than the second half. The second half of the book is a lot of introspective dealings on thinking about life and grief and her husband's chronic condition and what's going on with her father and thinking about her experience being brought up. And it was very like human in that way because a lot of how we process things in life aren't linear thoughts. It's just kind of like stream of consciousness and jumping around and piecing different narratives of our life together to build the story of who we are. But it didn't hit as hard for me. Like it didn't feel like it was saying new things or very impactful, meaningful things to me. Like I just didn't resonate with the second half as much. So that's why it ended up being a 3-star, but it definitely made me re-interested in Melissa Broder because previously after reading Milkfed, I was like, I don't know if that author is going to be for me. And now I'm like, I would like to read more things from this author, please, because that was an interesting experience. Next is Among the Living by Tim Leben. This was also in my Winterween reading vlogs. You can check out that video for my full thoughts and experience with this book. This was my first full-length novel from Tim Leben. I had read a short story of his in an anthology last year, and I just marked him down as one of those authors that I was interested in exploring more from because I really enjoyed the short story that I read from him. And this was his new book that came out this year, so I thought it would be appropriate to check it out. I also got this one on NetGalley, so decided why not? Might as well read it if I got an arc of it. This is a sort of climate fiction, survival, thriller, horror story where you're following these two groups of people who are out in the Arctic, I think they are. And one group is a bunch of climate activists and the other group is this group of people who exploit the earth for profit. So they're kind of placed against each other, but there are these two estranged friends who are in each group, and that's sort of what's bringing them together. And they end up getting into some trouble, and it's really vague. Like the synopsis does not reveal a lot to you, so I don't want to spoil the nature of the book, but they end up getting themselves into something and then they have to survive throughout the rest of the book. And if you know me, you know I love a survival story, so I did like the survival aspect of it. And in general, I really liked the writing and the character development, the setting, like everything about it was good. But it felt like one of those books that was just good to me and not great. Like I wish everything would have been dialed up a bit. I wish we would have gotten a little more character development, known a little bit more about the characters, get a little bit more invested in them, to get a little bit more into the action parts of things, like to feel a little bit more invested in what was going on. So in general, I think it was a good first experience with a full-length novel from this author. Apparently he has like a million other things out there, so I'm sure there's more I can find that I will enjoy more from him, but I will definitely be keeping an eye out for more books from him in the future, and also just if there's anything in his backlist I want to read, because I do think he has some interesting ideas and I like his writing style. Next up is What Is Mine. This is another arc that I had that I read in the Winterween reading vlog, and this one is set up as a thriller, but personally for me it read more like a drama or a family drama, but I did enjoy this one quite a bit. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. The main character that you're following this story is named Hope, and she has recently adopted her nephew Luca after her sister has passed. Her and her sister had an estranged relationship, and she's not sure the entire nature of what was going on with her sister and how she ended up dead, but she now has her nephew in her life, and so she has adopted him with her husband, and they've been taking care of him. But then very early on in the story, like I'm pretty sure in chapter 1, he goes missing, and the story is about Hope trying to figure out what happened to him and get him back. The book is a little bit slower paced. It does take until like 50% of the book to get to that first reveal and really raise the stakes and advance the story forward and really start to get you invested in some twists and reveals happening. But I did find it engaging overall. I really like the writing style of it. It felt very cinematic to me. Like I could fully picture these characters and what was happening, and I was invested and where Luca was and what was going to happen. I think it was just a good time. These sorts of like dramas, family dramas, usually aren't standout books for me that are my favorite, but it was just a good way to pass the time. I was invested. There's a little bit of some iffy stuff in the end regarding mental health representation that I wasn't fully sure how I felt about. So a little bit of caution if you're sensitive to that. This might not be the one for you. But if you're just looking for like a solid sort of domestic thriller, family drama type of story, if missing child plots are something that really interest you for some reason, I thought it was a solid story. Next up is Chlorine by Jade Song. This is another one of those audiobooks that I just popped on this month, and I really enjoyed this, and I ended up giving it a 4-star. Chlorine is a coming-of-age sapphic body horror type story that is about a young girl who believes that she is a mermaid. I was in for quite a few surprises with this one. I've heard many people talk about it, and I thought it was just going to be one thing. Like I had an idea in my mind of exactly what it would be based on that synopsis, but even just the structure of the way the story is told was a surprise for me. So I don't want to reveal too much because I thought it was really nice to have those little surprises and realize the story was more intricate and interesting than I thought it might have been just based off of that premise alone. But I was so pulled into this one. I thought the writing was fantastic, and there is a particular scene in this book, if you've read it, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that really caught me off guard. It was brutal and it was just like perfect. I'm just like, that's exactly where the story needed to go. It makes so much sense, and wow, what a story of coming of age as a young woman. My camera battery did just die, so if I moved, apologies. I did see some people in reviews of this book complaining about the writing style of it, saying it was like purple prose or over the top, like too much drama for them. I think the audiobook experience maybe helped with this because I didn't feel that way at all, which is funny because a lot of the books that I was complaining about this month, I was like, oh my god, they're so moody, they're so angsty, I don't like this writing style. And this arguably has a very similar writing style, but it just really worked for me in this one. And I think it really worked well doing the audiobook as well, because I thought the narrator did a great job. Like I was just so invested in the tone of the story and what was happening, and I just found it really engaging. So I will definitely be reading from this author again. Next up was a reread, and I never reread. I told you it was a weird month for me, but audiobooks were really getting me through. So I did this as a reread on audiobook, but I do also own the physical copy, and that is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson, which I'm pretty sure the first time I read this book, I also did it on audiobook. So I think I have now fully listened to this twice, but I owned a physical copy because I loved it so much that I bought it after I read it the first time. And then because the sequel is coming out, it might already be out by now, very soon, I wanted to refresh myself on this book and reread it. And I'm glad I did because I forgot a lot about this book. Like it basically was kind of like reading a book for the first time. I remembered small general things about it, but as far as details and the mystery of it, it felt like a full surprise to me. So I thought it was a really good reread experience, and I did end up feeling exactly the same about it as I did the first time pretty much. But I think I have a better understanding of why it's not a 5-star for me, but it's close. So I gave it a 4-star the first time I read it. I gave it a 4-star again. I would maybe go so far to say like a 4.5 star, but there's a lot of things that work so well for me in this book, but there's a main thing about the mystery that kind of doesn't work for me. A lot of things in this book work so well for me. Like I just love the classic murder mystery feel of it. I love the breaking of the fourth wall and the witty writing of it. I love the self-referentialness of it, that the book begins with the narrator telling you each chapter in which someone's going to die and just like fully transforming the mystery. Like it's so good. It's so good for so many reasons. But the reason it doesn't fully work for me, the reason why it hasn't become a 5-star favorite of all time necessarily, is because the nature of the mystery. So this is a story about this guy named Ernie Cunningham. And as the title suggests, everyone in his family has killed someone. They are all coming together for a family reunion, and when a dead body shows up, Ern is getting on the case, and he is going to figure out, is it someone in my family who's killing again, or is it something else going on? And then there's all these different like layers and levels of context in the story too for these different characters, and it's just funny and witty and wry and perfect and wonderful in so many ways. But the way the mystery has to get solved, this is not going to spoil the book for you, but just in general, like the nature of the mystery requires so much outside context from these main characters. Like you have to understand and learn so much about other relatives or people who are dead or just aren't in this story, really aren't main characters, and like decades of crime that went on between all of these people in order to be able to understand why the things that are happening here at this chalet are happening. They're at a ski resort. Did I tell you that? It's snowy. Great book for the winter. Anyways, I just wish it would have stayed more contained. I wished that the mystery could have been worked out more with these main characters, things that are happening here and now, not so much like removing you from the story to understand all these other things, to understand why the thing that has happened here. Like, I wouldn't mind some of that. I think some of that is fine, but it felt like it just gets so exterior and it pulls you out so much of this like closed circleness of it all. But that's really my only complaint. So I'm really looking forward to the sequel. I don't think a reread of this was necessarily necessary for the sequel. I think the sequel is just kind of following Ernie in a different situation with different characters. That's just a guess. I actually don't know that for sure, but I think that's what I've heard about it, is that you don't really have to know everything that went on in this one to go into that one. But I just wanted to reread it anyway, just because I've always kind of wondered why it wasn't a perfect 5-star for me. And I feel like I really got that clarity in a reread of understanding why the nature of the mystery didn't work for me as well. But still love it, still think it's great, and very much looking forward to reading the next book in the series. And finally, I feel like I've been going on for a very long time. This was a long wrap up. This is a really big way to get back into things. After I did a 4-book wrap up in December, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna sit down and film my wrap up. It'll be so easy. I think I've been here for like an hour talking about all of these books at this point. But we're almost done. We only have 2 more books to talk about, and they were both 5 stars. And this one will be very quick to talk about because it is the 5th book in a series. I told you, I'm back on my series bullshit this year. I'm just kidding. I don't know if I really am going to fully be into series. I'm actually starting a really long series right now. I'm reading the 1st book in the series right now, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I haven't finished it yet, so you'll find out in February. But I'm doing something kind of crazy. I'm reading something that you would probably never expect me to read. That is a really long series, and I think I'm really into it. So I don't know what this year is going to bring. This is a weird year for my reading so far, but I'm here for it. We're mixing it up. Things are getting new and interesting and fresh. Anyway, the book I have to tell you about is Heartstopper, Volume 5. So not the most, intensive series when we're talking about me being a series reader, but it's a series. It's a graphic novel series. This is the 5th one in the Heartstopper series, and everyone thought this was going to be the last one, and then Alice Oseman was like, JK, we're gonna do a 6th volume as well. So thankfully, Nick and Charlie's story is not over in this one. We have one more volume to come, and I can't wait because these are perfection. This is pure serotonin in graphic novel form. I loved it so much. I won't tell you too much about the contents of it because it is, the 5th in a series, and so if you plan on reading the graphic novel series, it could spoil you, I guess. But like, it's a romance series. The couple is together. Nick and Charlie are right here on the cover together, so they're still together. But I just thought this one was so beautiful, and the things that they experience together in this book are so real for like a teenage experience, for like a first love experience, especially like a first queer love experience, and the nuances of some of the things that they're coming to understand in this book. Oh my God. So good. I love them so much. I can't wait for the 6th volume. And lastly is a book I am ashamed to say I let sit on my shelves for so long because everyone says it's great. Everyone loves this book. It's another series, but this is the start of the series. This is so wild. I can't believe I'm involved in so many series right now. But it was just so hyped that I was sure it would be great, but the time had passed. I thought, I don't know if it's worth reading. But I just joined a book club with some of my coworkers, and this was the book, and I said, I guess I will finally have a reason to get it off my shelves. That is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, and this was a 5-freaking-star read. It was so good. Everyone was right. I can't believe I let it sit on my shelves for so long. I feel like I need to go back through everything on my shelves that I haven't read yet and see anything that has been hyped and just read it as soon as possible, because I'm sick of letting these books sit here for so long, and then I read them and they are fantastic, and they've just been sitting there forever. I've owned this book for years, like not 4 years, the number 4, but probably like 2 years, maybe 3 years. Honestly, 4 wouldn't be that crazy, but I have owned this book for several years at least, and I just never got around to reading it. And I did decide to do the audiobook experience of this one because I've heard the audiobook is so good, and you are so right. If you're reading this, you have to do the audiobook. I highly, highly recommend that experience. But if you are unaware, this is the start of a young adult mystery series where you are following a girl named Pip who is solving her first mystery. There is this famous case in her town of this teenage girl who went missing and was presumed murdered, and everyone thought her boyfriend did it, and he was going to go away for it, but then he ended up dead as well. He killed himself, and it's been this like huge mystery in their town. And she decides it's like her senior capstone project in school, she is going to investigate that and start talking to people and figure out what really happened. And I love her. I love her so much. She was such a great character to carry this story. She is just smart and has a lot of energy and passion, and it is just great. And there's also like a little bit of a romance element in the story too, but it doesn't take over. And I love that. It was just the right amount where you're like, yeah, no, romance is fine to be in here as well, but like, let's focus on the mystery. Let's not let some boy distract us with everything. And it wasn't like that at all. Like, she was a great character. I love the little romance element, and actually I thought they were a great little pair, and I just loved it. I loved everything about it. I thought it was great. It was a lot darker than I was expecting it to be. There were more twists and surprises than I thought there would be, and it was more surprising to me than I thought it would be. I just had this conception that I was like, oh, it'll just be like, you know, your average YA mystery that was just like massively appealing for some reason, but it'll probably just be a 3-star. Absolutely not. I loved it. I thought it was great. Now, I do have a question for you because I know you have probably read this, because everybody has. If you have read this and you loved this, should I continue on in the series? Because I went and looked at reviews for the second and third book, and it looks like it just progressively gets worse as the series goes on. So I'm like, oh, should I not ruin my experience with this and just let this be? Or is it worth exploring the other books in the series? If so, should I also do the audiobook versions of them? Let me know, because I'm unsure about that. I'm like, I could be perfectly content just leaving it here if the other 2 books aren't really worth picking up, and if they're going to kind of ruin my perception of all the wonderfulness that this was. So let me know your thoughts on that. But that is it for all the books I read in January. What a wrap up. What a start to the year. I feel so energized. I'm just so in the mood for reading. I'm stepping outside of my box in interesting ways in my reading right now. I am doing a lot more audiobooks. I have not listened to many audiobooks last year. I've had audiobook phases before, but I haven't been interested in audiobooks lately, and I listened to so many audiobooks in January, and I'm just loving audiobooks and crafts, and I'm getting into series, and I'm stepping out into other genres, and there's just some weird stuff coming that you're gonna see. And who knows, maybe it's just a phase, and maybe in another month I'll be back to just like normally scheduled reading. But right now I'm feeling really energized by just exploring my reading, having fun, leaning into what I'm enjoying, leaning out of things I'm not, and just DNFing books whenever I feel like it. And I just feel like I'm having a really good start to the reading year, so I hope that you are too. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, or let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all on my next video. Bye.